working with Rick, and just a real blessing. And one of these days he's going to really do something from God. Rick, if you're seeing this, one of these days he's going to matter.
Yeah, we might hear from this Rick Warren sometime. Now you're a pastor, and you not only pastor to veterans, and of course you're well known here in Las Vegas for your television show Momentum.
Yeah, I've gone from total obscurity to relative obscurity thanks to King 17 and Total Living Network. Here I is.
So tell us a little bit about the differences between being a pastor and being an evangelist.
Well, being an evangelist, you can let her rip, and after a week you're gone. You don't have to face people over and over again, and you don't have to undo the trouble you caused. But, being an evangelist, you share the message. It's a harvest type ministry. There is an office of evangelist in the Scriptures. Ephesians 4:11, he gave some prophets, some apostles, some evangelists, pastor, teachers. Now everybody is called to be an evangelist or to be a witness for Jesus Christ. That's every Christian.
We are told to do so.
Yes.
Commanded to do so.
But there is a specific office, and God didn't rescind that office, and it's people who travel from place to place, and in, let's say, Assembly of God churches where they have their camp meetings and harvest crusades, and many Baptist churches, they have so-called revivals and crusades and faith festivals and things like that, and it's a joy. Pastoring, you have other giftedness and skills. You can be an evangelistic pastor, preaching and reaching people, but you meet needs, you develop people, you train them, you grow them, and then you deal with some of the problems in the church, removing the cobwebs and making sure the trains run on time. And but you got some good pastors that are very evangelistic also. So there are some opportunities there. Currently, I'm a transitional pastor at First Southern Baptist Church of Las Vegas, Nevada, and it's a good opportunity and a good ministry, but eventually I'm going to be back on the road and preaching and teaching all over the world again.
What would you like to leave as your legacy? What would you tell men in particular, because of your background as a veteran and as a talk show host on a men's-oriented program? What kind of legacy would Danny Daniels like to have in that arena?
Well, it's not so much a personal legacy, because it goes back to John 3:30. He must increase, I must decrease. It goes back to John 3:27, where John the Baptist said, nothing giftedness comes unless it is received by God, and God has given some things to me. A unique sermon. I don't have to preach other people's sermons. I have a unique testimony to preach. And what I like to leave behind is the fact that I put it in S's. I outline it in S's, and it's like the S's of life. You begin as a man out of high school, you leave mom and dad, you establish yourself, and there's a struggle, maybe getting a job, a struggle, and then you get some stability, and then a little bit of success and a little bit of security, and those four S's. But there's another S, and that's significance. That's making a difference. That means that your life matters. And for some men, Dale, it's linear. It's linear. For other guys, especially men in Las Vegas, it's cyclic. You often start all over again in your 40s and your 30s or your 50s or your 60s or even older. And whether right now, as you're viewing this, you would categorize yourself in struggle or stability or success or real security. You can be involved in a ministry or a life that has significance in your home, your family, or your local church, some area of significance. You don't have to be rich and famous or published or on TV. You can be struggling. You could be starting over. You can, after a divorce or after a financial apocalypse or illness or regrouping. The main thing is significance. Does your life matter, and does your life count? It's what we do for Jesus Christ that really counts. And the greatest legacy that we leave is love for the Lord and loving people. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and love your neighbor as you love yourself, and share that in any way that you can.
That's wonderful.
Especially now with the Gulf War guys coming back, and the Afghan vets and Iraqi veterans, and they're going to have more struggles, I believe, than Vietnam veterans.
Really?
One of the burdens in my heart, it was known that many Vietnam veterans came home, and after they came home within 5, 10, 15 years, they took their own lives and committed suicide. You know, there's a fancy name, post-traumatic stress syndrome and PTSD. And, you know, the World War II guys had some of that. Those that saw direct combat, a lot of them drank themselves to death within 7 years. They did not have the visibility that the Vietnam veterans, you know, had in that area. And my burden is that we're now seeing Gulf War guys in Iraq, guys in Afghanistan committing suicide while they're in the theater of war itself. That didn't happen as much in Vietnam. And one of the differences in Vietnam is I knew the day I was coming home, and after that 13 months, I was done. We've got guys going to Iraq, going to Afghanistan on 3rd, 4th tours with rendition, and that affects family life. It affects a lot of things. And there's another thing, Dale, that most of our viewers may not realize. When I was in Vietnam, it was all guys. It was all Marines.
Yes,
I was in a very
sure.
male. I could go months and months and months and maybe a half a year without seeing a woman. Right now, in the Iraq theater and in Afghanistan, you've got men and women, you've got boys and girls with raging hormones in the
Working
tanks,
together,
in the
sure.
Humvees, and
Right.
and one of the problems of the psychosis and the stresses and things is that you throw a young guy and young gal, maybe one of them's married, they're away from home, they've experienced some situations, and if there's not a physical, sexual bonding, there's that emotional, and they're falling in love and all kinds of stuff there. And then one of them gets rotated and goes home. The other one might be devastated to the point that they go bonkers or take their own lives or just won't adjust.
Brand new problems.
Another
Brand
thing
new
to
problems,
realize
yeah.
with the IEDs, we had mortars and rockets and things, and of course bullets, and the greatest injuries in Vietnam were from the booby traps and mines and things, and booby traps all over. In the theater of Iraq and Afghanistan, it's these IEDs and things, and the wounds and injuries that people now have in Afghanistan and Iraq, those same wounds in Vietnam would have killed them.
Right.
Now they come home with brain damage, missing limbs, and we're going to have a bunch of people coming back home that have needs that need to be loved, and we should support them and be praying for our ministry in reaching out to all these veterans, especially the World War II guys. Tom Hanks has said that 1,000 World War II veterans are dying every day.
Yes.
And then, of course, the aging of the Vietnam veterans. I'm 60, so I'm a AARP qualified, platinum, pretty soon double platinum qualified. But they're aging. But then now we have a whole young generation of veterans coming back. It seems every generation goes to war.
Well. Yeah, they're needy as well.
The answer is in Jesus Christ and God's Word, and in a local church and a body of nurturing and support.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of time for this particular segment, I'm sorry to say. And, boy, I really appreciate your coming on. And tell us what else we're going to see in the documentary.
Well, you're going to see, I'm going to preach my full Mortal Midnight message in its entirety at the end of the documentary. And before that, some photos and some pictures about the Vietnam theater. And there are some things that are common for all combat experiences. There is a cost to serve. And our prayer and hope is that Vietnam veterans are welcome home. That's why we say, welcome home. But we want that welcome home to be welcome all the way home. And adjust. You guys are heroes. And we want to respect that. And so God bless you. Hey, Dale, thank you so much.
Thank you for your service.
You bet.
Appreciate it,
God
Sergeant.
bless you, Dale.
God bless you,
yes,
too.
Indeed.
Stick around. There's much more on this documentary, Mortal Midnight, with Pastor Danny Daniels.
I'm going to talk today about how my life went from an M16 in Vietnam to John 3:16 from a Baptist pulpit. I'm going to talk a little today about God's promises and promises in general. I'm going to talk about the greatest promise that's in the Bible, but first I want to tell you a little story that happened to me back in 1967 when I was a senior in high school at Camden High School in San Jose, California. a couple of months before graduation, they took all the senior boys and herded us into the gymnasium, and they were going to have all the recruiters from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Marine Corps. And each one of them had 5 minutes to do their spiel as to why we should join their brand of the service. And I want to tell you, it was a promise festival. One promise after another, after another. Now, if it was today, it would be boys and girls into the gymnasium. First recruiter that gets up there is the Army recruiter. And he said, boys, if you join the Army, we promise you, you won't have to go to Vietnam. And this was 1967, a year before the so-called height of the Vietnam War. You don't have to go to Vietnam. We can promise you duty in Alaska, NATO, in Europe. You can sign up on the buddy system. And he sat down, all these promises. And then the Navy recruiter gets up there. Navy recruiter gets up there and he's making a ton of promises. He said, if you join the Navy, you will travel and see the world. And he names off all these exotic places like Singapore and Hong Kong and Manila. And I thought, man, that's the ticket. I want to join the Navy, and I want to fight in bars and get drunk in Hong Kong and join the Navy. He said, it's an adventure. And he said, I guarantee and promise you that you'll see the world. Then the Air Force recruiter gets up. Air Force recruiter says, if you join the Air Force, we promise you and guarantee technical training. Why, young man, if you join the Air Force, you'll get training in electronics, computers, jet mechanics, avionics, and after you serve 4 years in the Air Force, you'll get a job anywhere in America with all the technical training that you get. And he made promise after promise after promise. And then the Coast Guard recruiter gets up there. And I thought, well, what's the Coast Guard guy going to say after what the Navy guy said about seeing the world and all the adventure and Coast Guard?